They said that once, long before anyone could remember, the vampire king had laughed. The elders of the mountain villages spoke of it softly, as if it were part of the wind itself, a time when his voice had not yet grown hollow, when the castle on the cliff still glowed with warm candlelight instead of cold, unblinking torches. They spoke of his first mortal life, of family long turned to dust, of a love whose name no one dared to say aloud. And then they spoke of the vow. He had sworn, it was said, never to love again. The vow lay over the kingdom like a quiet winter, not cruel, not kind, simply cold. Seasons came and went. Children were born and grew old beneath the shadow of his castle, yet no one could remember seeing him walk among them. No one could say if his eyes were red or gold or empty, for no one had looked into them and returned with a story. Still, there was a strange mercy in his distance. While other lands told tales of hungry lords and endless raids for blood, this kingdom knew something different. The vampire king fed rarely and in secret, the elders said, sustaining himself on what little he could take from the wild creatures of the deep forest, and on old, stale stores of blood sealed in crystal. He never called for a tithe of villagers, never demanded offerings at his gates. As long as the people stayed out of the forest at night and bowed their heads when the bats wheeled across the moon, he left them to their simple lives. So life went on. Fields were planted, harvests gathered, songs learned and forgotten. Yet always in the background of every hearthside story, there was the silent castle and the king who would not love and would not feed and would not die. In a small village tucked at the foot of the mountain, there lived a girl named Mara. She had grown up with these stories as other children grew up with lullabies. To her, the king was neither legend nor monster, but something quieter, a question that no one knew how to answer. Mara's family was poor, though not in spirit. Her mother stitched worn clothes until they could hold no more thread. Her father's hands were rough from coaxing thin crops out of stony soil. They laughed often, not because life was easy, but because it was theirs. On winter nights, they burned pine cones in the small hearth and told stories to keep away the biting cold. It was on such a night, when the wind pressed against the shutters and the candles burned low, that Mara first heard the whole of the tale. "Why does he not drink from us?" she asked, curled beneath a blanket, eyes reflecting the golden light. "If he is what they say, how can he live on so little?" Her grandmother, who sat knitting beside the fire, paused with her fingers curled around the yarn. "Because he made another vow, little one," she said at last. "Long ago he fed as his kind always had, and with each mortal he took, he felt himself grow farther from what he had been. When he lost the one he loved," her voice drifted like smoke, "he swore never again to taste the blood of one who still carried the warmth of the sun. Not ever, not even if it meant wasting away." Mara frowned thoughtfully. "But he's a king. Doesn't a king have to stay strong for his people?" Her grandmother gave her a long look, as if seeing something new in the girl's face. "Sometimes, child, a heart that has broken once would rather let the whole world crumble than risk breaking again." "Is that right?" Mara pressed. "To let everyone suffer because you're afraid?" The old woman sighed, but there was a hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. "You ask questions like you're older than you are. The world is not only right or wrong. It is filled with the choices people make when they are trying to bear the weight of their own pain." Mara cuddled deeper into her blanket, feeling the soft ache of that truth. She thought about a king in a lonely castle, surrounded by shadows and glass vials of old blood, refusing what he needed out of fear of his own heart. "Then why does no one go and talk to him?" she asked quietly. At that, her grandmother's needles stilled completely. The fire popped, showering a small burst of sparks into the air. "Because, dear heart," she said slowly, "no one returns from the castle of the vampire king." For a long time after, the image stayed with Mara, a man who had chosen hunger over hurting anyone ever again. In her mind, he was not a monster to be feared, but a lonely figure standing at a window, watching the seasons without feeling their touch. She could not say why this stirred something deep inside her, but it did. A small, stubborn warmth, like the first bud pushing through late snow. Years passed. Mara grew from a thin-legged child into a young woman with steady hands and clear, watchful eyes. She worked in the fields, learned to bind wounds and soothe fevers, helped her neighbors when they had less than she did. Her life was not grand, but it was woven with small kindnesses, the way her grandmother's knitting was woven with careful, patient loops. It might have gone on that way forever, if not for the new messengers. They came one spring evening, just as the sun sank and the sky turned the color of bruised plums. 3 riders in dark cloaks, their horses lean and restless, bearing the crest of the castle. A silver bat circling a black moon. The village gathered in the square, curiosity and unease mingling in the air like mist. An old man with a scroll dismounted and read in a voice that shook only a little. "By the decree of the Council of Night," he intoned, "and in the name of the ancient line of kings, the vampire king is hereby commanded to resume the taking of human blood from his subjects, or to abdicate his throne and pass it to one who will." A murmur rose from the crowd, then fell as he raised a hand. Until now, the king has fed on insufficient stores and the blood of beasts, weakening himself and the old protections that shield this realm. The council warns that if he does not grow strong, other lords, less merciful, will come. To preserve the kingdom, the king must either drink as his kind were meant to, or surrender his crown. Mara felt something twist low in her chest. Around her, faces tightened with fear, anger, resignation. One of the riders began to nail a copy of the decree to the inn door. "What does it mean for us?" someone whispered. "It means," another answered grimly, "that either we bleed for him or we bleed for worse." That night, no one sang. Children were hushed and sent to bed early. Doors were barred, lamps burned late. The decree sat on the inn door like a shadow that no amount of candlelight could chase away. In her small house, Mara lay awake long after her parents' breathing had turned slow and even, staring at the low ceiling. She thought of the Council of Night, whoever they were, and of other lords less merciful. But most of all, she thought of the king himself, confronted with this choice, to break his vow and drink, or to step down and invite a more ruthless ruler to take his place. She tried to imagine him as the stories said, a figure carved of moonlight and regret, dragging out an existence on the barest scraps of sustenance, all to avoid touching another human soul. How long had he endured that way? How many years of cold, careful restraint? A quiet certainty rose inside her, as steady as dawn. Left alone, he would choose to fade rather than harm the people again. And the council would not allow it. They would replace him. In the fragile darkness, a thought came, simple and insistent. Someone should go to him. The next morning, Mara rose before the sun. She moved quietly, careful not to wake her parents. On the rough table, she left a folded scrap of cloth weighted with a smooth river stone. Upon it, in her careful hand, she wrote, "I go to speak to the king. Forgive me for not asking. There is not enough time for fear." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "Tell grandmother she was right. The world is not only right or wrong, but we still must choose." She took a cloak and a small bundle of bread, then slipped out into the chill before dawn. The air smelled of earth and dew. Above her, the castle stood against the paling sky, its spires like dark fingers reaching for the light. The path up the mountain was steep and little used. Roots twisted across the stones, and the forest pressed close, its trees old and knowing. As she climbed, the sounds of the village faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of unseen birds. Fear walked with her, quiet but persistent. It whispered of teeth and claws, of ancient hunger, of stories that ended at the castle gate. Yet alongside fear walked something else, a kind of steady calm that came from knowing, deep down, that she was not going to bargain or beg for herself. She was going to ask a tired king to make one more hard choice, and perhaps to make one of her own. Hours passed. The sun climbed, then slanted westward. At last, the trees thinned, and Mara stepped onto a wide ledge of stone. Before her, the castle loomed, its walls dark and weathered, its windows like watching eyes. The great doors, carved with bats and twisted vines, stood closed. She approached them, each step measured. When she lifted the heavy knocker, its metal was cold enough to sting. The sound of it striking the door echoed through the stillness like the tolling of a slow bell. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of old stone and something older still. Myra listened to her own heart beating, to the small, stubborn rhythm of life within her. Then, with a muted groan of ancient hinges, the door opened. The figure who stood there was not what she had expected. He was tall, yes, and pale as if the sun had long forgotten his name. His hair, once perhaps as black as a raven's wing, was threaded with silver that caught the dim light. His eyes were a curious shade, neither fully red nor wholly human, but a deep, tired amber, like sap that had seen too many seasons. He wore no crown, only a simple dark coat that hung a little loose on his frame. There was a faint stoop to his shoulders, a suggestion of weight carried for too long. He regarded her in silence, and in that silence, Mara felt not menace, but a vast, bone-deep weariness. "You are very young to be at my door alone," he said at last, his voice low and rough, like pages turned after centuries. "Do they send volunteers now? I had hoped they would at least keep their children from this place." "No one sent me," Mara replied, surprised at the steadiness of her own tone. "I came because I heard the decree." His eyes flickered, a shadow of something like pain passing through them. "Ah," he murmured. "The council has a long reach and little patience. You came to beg for mercy, to plead that I refuse them and let another take the throne, or to offer yourself as a show of loyalty so they might believe I am feeding as I must." Mara took a breath. The air in the doorway felt cooler than the mountain breeze, touched by old stone and older magic. "I came," she said carefully, "to say that if someone must be the first to bleed for you, let it be me. Not because the council demands it, because the people in my village are already afraid and they have children. I have no husband, no children of my own. My parents are getting old. It feels wrong to wait and let fear choose for us." Something in his face softened, though his expression remained distant. "You would give your life so readily?" he asked. "For a king you have never seen, who has done nothing for you but hide in his tower and starve in silence." Mara shook her head. "I don't know if it would take my life. I only know that a choice made freely is different from one forced on the fearful. If you must drink, let your first taste be given, not taken." He studied her closely then, as if trying to see the shape of her soul through bone and skin. "And if I refuse?" he asked quietly. "If I cling to my vow and let the council tear the crown from my hands, and with it the last weak protections I have left to offer, what then, Mara of the mountain village?" She blinked at the sound of her name. "Then another will come," she said, "and he will not ask. He will take what he wants and more. I don't think you want that for us." His lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, he looked very old indeed. "You speak as if you have known me," he murmured. "I've only known the stories," she answered gently. "Stories of a king who chose to starve rather than harm another, even after a great loss. Stories of a heart that froze itself rather than let love break it again. I don't think such a heart would easily watch its people suffer." He turned his gaze away, out over the distant forests and fields. From the castle's height, the world below looked small and fragile, a patchwork of lives he had watched but could no longer truly feel. "I swore," he said, the words heavy, "upon the grave of the one I lost, that I would never again drink from a living human. that I would never again bind my fate to warm blood, nor let my hunger touch another beating heart. That vow is one of the few pieces of myself I have left." Mara listened, feeling the quiet ache behind his words. "And yet," she said softly, "your people live in the world your kind has made. The council does not honor your vow. The other lords do not honor it. Only you do, and we pay the price of that loneliness together. Perhaps the question is not whether you will break your vow, but what you will do with the power you take if you do." He was silent for a long time. The wind tugged at the edges of his coat. A raven cried somewhere on a higher tower. Finally, he stepped back from the door. "Come in," he said. "If you cross this threshold, you cross it of your own will. I will not force you." Mara hesitated only once, feeling the subtle tingle of ancient wards along the doorway. Then she stepped forward. The hall beyond was vast and shadowed, lit by a scattering of pale flames in tall sconces. The air smelled of stone and old candles, and beneath that, a faint copper tang that was more memory than scent. Dust lay on many surfaces, as if even the servants had grown rare. He led her through corridors lined with faded tapestries, scenes of long-ago harvest festivals, coronations, a young king with eyes bright and eager as he held the hands of mortals and immortals alike. In none of those woven images did Mara see the man walking beside her. At last, they came to a smaller room, its walls lined with shelves of books and bottles. A single chair sat beside a tall window, its cushions worn in the shape of one who had sat there many nights, watching the world turn. "Sit," he said gently, gesturing to a cushioned bench. "I will not rush this. If at any moment you choose to leave, I will unlock the door myself and walk you back to the path." "What is your name?" Mara asked as she sat. It felt right to ask before offering so much. He looked taken aback for a heartbeat, as if the question had fallen out of some forgotten past. "Names change," he replied. "There were ages when I had 3, each for a different court. But once, long ago, my mother named me Corin. I have not heard it spoken in 100 years." "Then I will call you Corin," she said. "If this is to be my choice, I would like to know whom I am choosing." Something like a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Very well, Mara." He moved carefully, with a slowness that spoke not of physical weakness alone, but of reluctance etched into each motion. From a shelf, he took a small crystalline cup, clear as ice. From a drawer, he brought out a narrow silver blade, its edge fine and clean. "When I was first made what I am," he said, almost as if to himself, "they taught me to tear and rip, to revel in the rush, the heat, the surrender. But there are gentler ways. I will take only what I must and no more. If at any moment you feel faint or afraid, say my name. I will stop." Mara nodded, rolling up her sleeve to reveal the pail inside of her wrist. Her heart beat a steady rhythm, not without fear, but shaped more by a quiet acceptance. She had seen pain before, in childbirth, in sickness, in old age, and she understood that sometimes, to ease one kind of suffering, another must be born. He sat opposite her, the blade in his hand trembling just slightly. Up close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint hollows beneath his cheekbones. This was no ageless monster, frozen at the peak of his power. This was a man worn thin by refusal. "Why do you look at me so?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because," she answered, "you look like someone who has been alone too long." He swallowed, a small, unnecessary movement. Then, with the greatest care, he took her offered arm in his cool hand and brought the blade to her skin. The slice was swift and clean, a brief, bright sting. Dark red welled up, warm and living, into the waiting cup. Mara watched it with a strange detachment, feeling both the slight pull within her and the larger, stranger sense of something about to change. Corin held the cup, as if it contained the last light of the sun. "It has been so long," he murmured, more to the room than to her. So long since I allowed myself to touch this." He raised the cup, but before it reached his lips, a shudder ran through him. His eyes closed. "I do not know what will happen," he said hoarsely. "I fear what it may wake in me. If I lose myself, if I become what I was trained to be, you must." He trailed off, knowing there was little she could do against him if that came to pass. Mara's free hand, almost of its own accord, rose and touched his wrist. "Corin," she said softly, the name gentle and steady. "I am not here to be your prey. I am here to be your choice. Remember that. Remember who you have been all these years, holding back for our sake. Take this as a gift, not as a fall." For a long moment, he simply breathed, an old human habit he had never quite abandoned. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he brought the cup to his lips and drank. The blood touched his tongue like fire and like spring rain. It was warmth he had not let himself feel in centuries, a rush of color through a grayscale world. He felt it spread through him, down to the tips of his fingers, up into the hollows of his mind where old hunger coiled. There was a moment, sharp, dangerous, when the old thirst roared up, demanding more, promising ecstasy in surrender. He saw in a flash how easy it would be to seize her arm, to drink until the room blurred and time meant nothing. And then, through that rising red tide, he felt it. The light pressure of Mara's hand on his wrist, the steady, unflinching presence of her gaze. Not terrified, not entranced, present, offering. He forced himself to stop. The cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the stone floor. Blood spread in a dark, glistening stain. He dropped to his knees, not from weakness, but from the weight of what he had just held back. Mara swayed slightly, more from emotion than from blood loss. She slid from the bench to kneel beside him. "Corin," she asked quietly. He lifted his head. His eyes, still amber, now held a faint glow from within, as if a coal long dormant had been gently fanned. But they were clear. She saw no madness there, no consuming hunger, only awe and sorrow, and something tentatively reaching beyond both. "I remember," he whispered. "I remember what it is to feel, but—" His gaze searched her face as if looking for some hidden wound. "You are still yourself. I did not take everything." She almost laughed, a soft, incredulous sound. "Of course not. You chose not to. You can choose." He sat back, as if the idea were a new structure being built inside him. "All my life since the turning," he said slowly, "I believed that to love was to lose myself, that to taste blood freely was to become a beast, so I chose emptiness over that risk. Now," he looked at the shattered cup, "your blood is not like the others I remember. There is a stillness in it, a strength that flows without drowning." Mara flexed her fingers, testing her own strength. She felt tired, but not undone. A strange warmth had settled in her chest, as if some invisible thread now connected her to him, not in chains, but in shared understanding. "Maybe it is not my blood," she suggested gently. "Maybe it is what you decided while you drank. You could have taken more, you didn't." He was quiet, letting that truth sink in. He had faced the old hunger, and for the first time had not let it dictate all. A thought bloomed at the edge of his awareness, hesitant and bright. What if, he hesitated, then went on. What if the curse is not as simple as we were told? We were taught that we must take to live, that our power came from spilling and consuming. But your choice to give and my choice to stop it feels different. The power in it is quieter. It does not claw, it binds. Mara tilted her head. Then perhaps the law is not that you must take, but that blood shared creates a bond. If that bond is made in terror and violence, it breeds monsters. If it is made in trust, maybe it heals. He looked at her with something like wonder. "You speak as if you could see the first laws written," he said softly. "As if you stand outside all this and look in." She smiled, faint and a little wry. "My grandmother says I ask questions as though I am older than I am. I do not know the laws. I only know how this feels. He pushed himself to his feet and offered her a hand. When she took it, his grip was cool but no longer icy. He helped her back to the bench and found a clean cloth to bind her wrist, his touch careful, almost reverent. "When the council learns I have fed," he said, tying the knot gently, "they will be satisfied. They care only that I am strong enough to keep other lords at bay. They will not ask how I did it. They will not imagine I did it this way." Mara watched him, eyes thoughtful. "Will you call others here? Ask for volunteers? I do not know how many will say yes." He shook his head slowly. "I will not turn my castle into a place of sacrifice, however willing. But," he looked back toward the corridor, as if seeing through stone and distance to the villages below. "You have shown me something I had forgotten. That power can be shared lightly, that bonds can be chosen, not forced." He moved to the window, drawing back the heavy curtain. Afternoon light spilled into the room, soft and golden. He stood in it without flinching, though his skin did not quite take on its warmth. "For centuries we have lived by one law," he said. "Take blood, rule in fear, or starve in isolation. Perhaps there is a different way, a law written not in terror but in trust. Not all will embrace it. Some cannot imagine freedom without domination. But here, in this small kingdom, perhaps we can begin." Mara joined him at the window, her bandaged hand resting lightly on the sill. "What will you do?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, then spoke with a new steadiness, the tone of someone choosing a path. "I will write my own decree," he said. "I will call for those who are ill, those near the end of their lives, those who wish to give a part of themselves to protect their families. I will offer them a bond, a sharing of blood that does not drain but connects. I will drink, yes, but only in measure and only from those who understand and consent. In return, the power that blood grants can be turned outward, to strengthen our walls, to soften the hunger of the wild things, to shield the villages from storms and marauders." He turned to her, his gaze steady. "I have hidden from love because I thought it would destroy me. Yet your simple compassion has done what centuries of solitude could not. It has reminded me that love is not only passion and loss. It can be a quiet promise, kept one choice at a time." Mara felt her throat tighten. "And what of your first vow?" she asked gently. "The one you made on the grave of the one you lost." Corin's gaze drifted inward, toward memories only he could see. "I vowed never to let my hunger touch another living heart," he said. "Today I did, but I did not devour. I received what you gave and I chose restraint. Perhaps I can keep the spirit of that vow in a different way. I can vow instead that my hunger will serve my people, not rule them, that I will never again take more than is freely given, that the blood I drink will be honored as a gift, not a right." He looked at her again, his eyes softer than before. "Vows, too, can transform," he murmured. "Like people, like kings." They stood together in the light, a human girl and an ancient vampire, listening to the distant sounds of the world below. A dog's bark, a faint echo of a woodcutter's song, the whisper of wind through new leaves. "Mara," Corin said after a time, "when you came to my door, you thought you might be offering your life. You have given more than that. You have given me another way to be what I am." She smiled, a small, honest thing. "And you," she replied, "have shown me that monsters are sometimes just people who have been told the wrong stories about themselves." He let out a breath that might once have become a laugh. It remained instead a warm exhale, carrying a hint of relief. "Will you return to your village?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "They will need to know what has changed. They are still afraid, but fear bends when it meets truth." He nodded. "I will send word too, not as a command but as an invitation. Let them decide if they wish to share this bond. Let love, not the council, not old laws, shape what we become." She touched her bandaged wrist, feeling the faint, unfamiliar echo of his presence, like a second pulse far away. "If they ask me what happened here," she said, "I will tell them this, that the vampire king did not take my life. He took my trust and gave me his in return. And somewhere in that exchange, an ancient law broke, not with a sound like shattering glass, but like ice melting in spring." Corin bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect given from king to subject, and from one soul to another. "Then go with my blessing, Mara," he said. "And if ever you wish to return, not as an offering, but as a guest, my door will open for you." She walked back down the mountain path in the gentle light of late afternoon, the castle behind her no longer a looming threat, but a place where a tired heart had begun, at last, to thaw. The air felt different, as if the whole mountain had exhaled. In the weeks that followed, stories spread as they always did, faster than messengers and more enduring than decrees. They spoke of a new law in the vampire king's realm. No more forced takings, no more silent terror. Of bonds entered willingly, in which those who gave a drop of their life found their illnesses easing, their nights free of bad dreams, their homes a little safer from harm. They spoke of fields spared from blight by unseen hands, of wolves that circled the villages but did not cross invisible lines, of storms that split and passed around the valley as if guided by a gentle, watchful will. And woven through these tales was another, quieter thread, of a girl from a mountain village who had walked into the castle of the vampire king and come out again, her life still her own, her heart carrying a new kind of understanding. As for the king himself, those few who glimpsed him from afar said he seemed changed. Not suddenly youthful, not transformed into some shining hero of legend, but a little straighter in his stance, a little less shadow in his eyes. Sometimes, on calm evenings, he could be seen at a balcony, watching the villages below with a gaze that held not just melancholy, but something like affection. They said that on certain nights, when the moon was thin and the stars were bright, if one stood very still and listened, one might hear a sound carried faintly across the distance from the castle on the cliff. Not a cry, not a command, but the low, quiet echo of a man who had once forgotten how, remembering at last. The soft, astonished laughter of a king whose cold heart had been touched, and who had chosen, against all his old fears, to love his people again. In time, this, too, became legend, not of a monster to be feared, nor even of a tragic ruler to be pitied, but of a simple, enduring truth, that even the oldest vows and the darkest curses can bend before one clear, compassionate choice. That love need not arrive in thunder or fire. It can come on quiet feet, bearing nothing more dramatic than a willingness to share pain and to trust. And so the kingdom lived on, not without sorrow, but with a new kind of peace, a peace born not of domination or denial, but of a bond freely given and gently held.